Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and you're very welcome to the final of our test automation series here on Test Huddle. I want to thank you for attending today. Today we have Jarad presenting. He follows on from Dorothy Graham, who presented yesterday, and Kim, who presented on Monday. Both of those webinars, folks, if you missed them either yesterday or Monday, are available to view back on Test Huddle. So just head over to testhuddle.com and be able to watch them back. As I said, Jarad is presenting today. Jarad works for Agile Artisans based in the United States. He's based on the East Coast there, and his talk today will be called Continuous Feedback, New Paradigm. Now, if you are interested in the discussion to talk about the webinar, or if you have any questions at all during the session, please use the question box that you'll find in your on the right-hand side of your screen to enter any questions you might have. So if you have any topics come up in relation to what Jarad is talking about and you'd like to ask him a question about it, we'll have a Q&A at the end of the webinar, so you'll be able to ask questions there. And if you have any technical questions relating to if you have audio troubles or anything like that, you can ask myself those questions as well through the question box, and I'll be able to help you out. So I want to thank you for attending again. My name is Ron. I am the Community Manager on Test Huddle, and I'm filling in for Jarad today. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Jarad now and let him guide you through continuous feedback, sorry, Jarad. So I'll hand over to you, Jarad.
Good morning. Thank you. Let's see. Awesome. All right. Handover is complete. Good morning, everybody. Imagine my accent will provide a little bit of entertainment this morning, but it's more fun that way. This is continuous feedback, the new paradigm. I always like to start off the slides with something informative. So who am I? My name's Jarad Richardson. I've been working with Andy Hunt, co-founder on the GROWS methodology, which is a new Agile methodology. Wrote a few books. The most popular one, I believe, was Ship It. It's in 7 languages at this point. Screencast editor for the Pragmatic Programmers. I'd like to say I'm the second public signatory of the Agile Manifesto. So I was very fortunate when the Agile Manifesto was being written. One of the guys helping to write it, Andy Hunt, was a friend of mine, and he called me and said, hey, this is a big deal. You need to get in on this, and here's the web page. So I went to the Agile Manifesto page, and I signed it, which means really absolutely nothing in terms of expertise or that I know anything, but I've been carting it out for, 10 years now, so why stop now, right? Agile user group back in 2007. Agile RTP now has over 1,700 members. That's local in Research Triangle Park, North Carolina, the Raleigh-Durham area. I'm an Agile coach, and you can find me on the web at agileartisans.com. And all of that is just a way to stall just a bit more to let a few more people join the webinar. So here's our outline for the day. We're going to talk about the traditional feedback loop and problems perhaps we've had with that. We're then going to look at what most people who feel like they're doing a great job do today, and what's the future hold, and then we're going to drop a challenge, something for you to do moving forward. So what's the traditional feedback loop? What have we done for so many years that is normal, quote-unquote, software? And the real question is, how long is that loop for you? In the job you're working right now, from somebody getting an idea until that idea is validated, how long do you wait? What about from the time a developer starts coding until you're verifying? Are we talking weeks, months? How about for a given environment that you support, whether it's dev, the QA testing environment, whether it's staging, or whether production? What's the time gap between something breaking and you knowing? Well, here's our traditional feedback loop. We'll step back a bit. The traditional plan for building software, right? Somebody writes requirements, they complete them, they hand them over to the development team, The development team finishes their work. They hand it over to the test team, the QA team, the verification, the validation, and then, of course, cheating by queuing off the title of my first book, we ship it. And this, this works really well because you always have clean, clear requirements that are exactly understandable. The development team works very hard, and they always finish on time. This is where I hate that it's a webinar because I love seeing the smiles on people's faces. And then everybody, validation QA goes, wow, great job. This is exactly what we were expecting. You guys knocked it out of the park, and then we have a celebratory party, and everyone's happy, right? That's the plan. That's what comes out of the PMO, the Project Management Office. Fortunately, the reality is a bit more like, fuzzy and incomplete requirements, and the dev team works really hard, but they finish a bit late. Okay, they finish very late. So let's just expand out the deadline, and we don't want to move when we ship, so let's just squeeze down testing, right? You guys don't need as much time as you said you needed. Let's give you about a third of the time you needed, but I still need a complete validation. And then when we actually sit down to look at it in demo, our discussion ends up being an explosion. Nobody's happy. It's not what you wanted. That's not how it's supposed to work. So we start over. When we do this a few times, and it's a very long feedback loop, a very expensive feedback loop, and I would argue a ultimately failed feedback loop. The traditional validation, it's really, really slow, often takes months. There's a large IBM site just up the road from where I'm at. I worked there in the mid-90s. And I remember talking with a senior engineer when I was just fresh out of college, still excited and not cynical and had a fresh view of the world. And he told me he was leaving IBM. And I asked him why, and he said, well, it's been 10 years, and I've never shipped anything. He said, I will work on a project for between 1 and 3 years. We'll write code. We'll work on test plans. We'll do all this work, and then the project is always canceled. He said, I want to go somewhere with a faster feedback loop so I can actually ship anything. When your feedback loop is years, traditional validation, it's slow. It's generally manual. It's infrequent. And the real problem is it tends to be very reactive. We don't start the validation until somebody tells us they're ready. And that is probably the root of the problem. So the tradition is we start late. We're always short on time. The problems always accumulate. People feel like we have this linear path of accumulated issues, but we don't. It's actually more of a logarithmic increase. The more problems accumulate, and QA and test is always blamed for the issues. It's never pushed back on development. You broke the product. You caused us to ship late. It's your issue. It's your problem. And we end up being in constant conflict with both management and development. To this sort of work. The first is we wait until it's time. Until the dev team is ready, we write our test plans, we prep our environments, we prepare constantly, and then we engage. However, on the flip side is more of the constant feedback paradigm, which of course is what we're here to talk about. And those two approaches put differently is one, lets pressure build up. The entire project, the pressure is building, it's getting higher, it's getting larger, as opposed to depressurizing daily. And this is not news to you, right? What happens when the pressure builds up too high? What happens when the whole, the future of the company is riding on this project, development ran over, took double the amount of time they needed, you told everybody you need this long to verify, you've now got 1/10 that time. The result of a high-pressure situation is generally an explosion. It's never good. It is never good. So what's the next generation look like, if I can invoke a little bit of pop culture here? The next generation to be a bit oversimplified, is to script stuff, automate the tests, and run everything frequently. It seems simple, and you know what, it is simple, but it's simple in the same way that a marathon is simple. If you want to do a marathon, it's pretty easy. Just put one foot in front of the other and don't stop for, 26 miles. Hey, you've done a marathon. This is easy too. It's simple. It's not easy, I should say. When I come in as a coach to a client and they feel like they're doing great, they are top of the stack, they're doing what they need to do, and I ask them, where are you at? And they say, well, we've scripted our builds, we've got our unit tests, and we run everything in continuous integration, and they feel so mature, so advanced. And at the end of the day, while a lot of teams consider this state-of-the-art right now, it isn't. This is pretty basic. The continuous integration loop, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, I love it. It is extremely powerful. You get a piece of software. I'm a cheapskate. There's lots of open source tools out there like Jenkins. If you're on the Microsoft stack, TFS has this built in. But the continuous integration software watches your source code. Whether you're using Git, Subversion, RTC, doesn't matter. It watches the code. Every 5 minutes or so, it'll go check things, and if anyone has touched anything in the code repository, whether it's a config file, a document, code, doesn't matter. If anything's been touched, it will run a compile. It'll pull the code out, it'll build it. Assuming the build passes, it will then run all the unit tests. Unit tests are developer-created, small tests, one class, one test sort of a thing, one method, one test. Very small, very targeted. They do a very good job of showing you what bits within the system have broken. The unit test passes, we publish. I love to say it. It's hard to fire people, but peer pressure is a wonderful, beautiful tool. If there's one or two developers on the team who constantly break builds, we bring in a continuous integration system, and instead of just publishing or sending that email to the developer who broke the build, we send the email to the entire team. If you're at a small company, 20 or 30 people, send the email to everybody. When the office manager who works at the front desk lady gets the mail for the day and walks around and she's handing out the mail to people, handing out the postal delivery, and she stops and goes, "Hey, Joe, I noticed you broke the build 3 times today. I thought you were good." Now you've got some peer pressure going. And it's a whole lot easier to encourage a developer to fix a build if they get the notification 10 or 15 minutes after they touch the code. But again, while this is a very powerful idea and very powerful concept, this is what most people feel like is state-of-the-art. And it's not. It was state-of-the-art 10 years ago. So at the end of the day, you compile. So what? I really don't care that you compile. You're like a doctor going into surgery and you're saying, "Hey, I've washed my hands," right? We've all heard the story about how back in the 1800s, late 1800s, doctors were not washing their hands. They didn't see the need. The doctors were in too big of a hurry to go from surgery to surgery to surgery to wait. So instead of washing their hands, they would just go from patient to patient to patient and amazingly had very high mortality rates. So if you've got continuous integration and your compiles are clean and your unit tests are clean, all you're telling me is you washed your hands. That's basic hygiene. If you're going to amputate a foot, you're telling me that you've picked the right leg. You haven't randomly pulled the wrong leg off. This is a great place to start. If you're going to operate on my leg, I want to know that your hands are clean. I want to know that you're on the correct leg. We've all seen the funny gone viral video clips of somebody writing on their